We then mined that database, and we compared the next 5-year requirement to the past 5-year need. And in the previous 5 years, which was about as high as A&M had spent on facilities in years, they spent $200 million in just existing facilities. Now, we're not talking about new construction, because there were a number of buildings that were built during that time frame. You juxtapose the $200 million investment to the $1.2 billion need, and you could see why it froze the decision making. There's just no way that the problems are so big. Why would you spend $1 on this? So the reaction was basically, there was a lot of data, a little bit of information, but not a lot of knowledge to tell you what to do. And that needed to change. So the task force was created. 23 people, faculty, administrators, staff, and students were on that committee. There were 3 or 4 steering committees, 3 committees, one to deal with each of these core questions: defining deferred maintenance, setting priorities, and coming up with a funding strategy. So it was built as a very collaborative environment and a very collaborative approach. They issued an RFP. We gladly, we were one of, how many? There were like 12 or 15 organizations that submitted their credentials, and luckily we were chosen.
What year did this start, this initiative?
The Deferred Maintenance Task Force was started in the spring, a year ago, right now. It was just a year ago, because it was last August when we came on board. Mm-hmm. We came on board to help Sightlines. Sightlines was hired in August of 2010. But the task force was created in, what, February or March of?
It was actually not created until June.
Oh, until June,
It was
okay.
put together in June.
Oh, that's right. In the infinite wisdom, the task force was created in June, and so it was, and with a goal of issuing the report on all these issues by November 1st of 2010. Needless to say, my wife was not pleased by the frequent flyer miles between Connecticut and Houston and College Station. Basically, we undertook several tasks. The first is we needed to scrub this database, because until that database became more understandable and more manageable, and so you could manipulate it, you really couldn't come to any good decision making. So we had to freeze that first. Second, we needed to go with the task force and develop ideas for priority assessment. Third, we needed to modify the process for how you select projects and change it from picking projects to picking direction was the initiative. So therefore, how do you define the investment pools and the investment priorities rather than saying this is the roof or this is the chiller? And that was the real key. Then come up with recommendations about what would be optimal and what would be adequate, if you will. Okay? There are 4, we firmly believe there are 4 kind of key issues here whenever you're thinking about a capital program. You have to have a credible project identification. It's a technical review. You have to have information about all your systems. It has to integrate with your other databases, your work orders, and all those kinds of components, and your other capital budgets. That database, though, feeds into a project selection process. And that project selection process is about setting multi-year priorities. I was just at a small campus out in Oregon, and they have an annual capital budget that's $5 million, and their annual capital budget is a disaster because the fights get so small over every individual project because it's not enough money for everything to go around that and there's no consistency over time, no direction, no impact of what's a relatively large amount of money for a small institution. I mean, we're talking 1.5 million square feet campus, so $5 million should make a difference. I asked the president, why don't you think about it, instead of a 1-year $5 million budget, why don't you think about it as a 5-year $25 million budget? If you were going to spend $25 million over 5 years, how would you set your priorities and what would you do? His answers were very, very different than what they've been doing over each year on a one-by-one basis. So the project selection process changed the policy, changes that perspective. Once you have that, then there's an annual capital budget that ultimately picks projects consistently with the multi-year project selection plan. All right? That's also the way to engage the campus community. You have to talk to your customers. I know it's hard. I know you're busy with all the other things, but if you don't engage them and you don't find out what they're doing, you're going to miss something. So ultimately, the annual capital process is about engagement and building credibility. Once you have that, then you can go to execution. In my personal opinion, the difficulty that A&M had by going and doing the facility condition assessment is they wanted to skip steps 2 and 3. They wanted to go and say, here's the project need, now give me the money and I'll do the investment. We were talking, I was laughing, it reminded me of, you guys have seen My Cousin Vinny, right, the movie? Everybody probably has seen that movie. And the great part with Joe Pesci goes up at the initial thing and he goes, but my boys are innocent. And the judge says, excuse me, but you want to jump past the arraignment, skip the trial, don't worry about the deliberations of the jury, and just find your son's innocent or your boy's innocent because they said they didn't do it. Well, that's what happened. You got to go through the process. As painful as it may be, you learn a lot, and it really helps. So that's the process that started to evolve and started to bring to change.